All right, we got a Bloomberg interview here with the $10 trillion man himself, Mr. Larry Fink, speaking about the economic outlook of the stock market and inflation, and some analysis of what the Federal Reserve has done and what the Biden administration has done as well. Let's have a listen.
The markets have had sort of a rocky road, can we say, so far this year. As you look forward, is there any real prospect they can recoup in the second half of the year?
Probably not totally. Let's start off. The market has recalibrated itself. We witnessed now a change in policy in the Federal Reserve. We raised short rates. We saw a recalibration of growth stocks. That's principally the majority of the downfall, and yet the index are masking some of the problems because part of the index are energy companies, commodity companies that are up quite a bit. So if you look at the volatility in the market and the spread between winners and losers, it's pretty broad this year. And so we've taken out a lot of those gains that we saw during the COVID years and during the 2 years where we were, changing our lives and we were emphasizing different companies, and now we're seeing the reverse impact of that. So that was one of the foundations of it. But now there's greater recognition that inflation is not transitory. It is probably with us for a number of years. And it's the type of inflation that I don't believe the Federal Reserve has the policy or the tools to do much with it right now. And I'm personally not blaming the Federal Reserve for where we are right now.
Yeah, you really shouldn't blame the Federal Reserve for where we are right now, since he was the consultant for the Federal Reserve on what to do when the market melted down in 2020. The Federal Reserve outsources their crisis management to BlackRock. They did it in 2008. They did it in 2020. So I'm not surprised he won't criticize the Federal Reserve, because he'd be criticizing the man in the mirror if he did that.
But I believe most of the problems we're living with today are more policy generated and supply generated. Demand right now in our economy is equivalent to the demand that we saw pre-COVID. And so we're witnessing all these supply shocks, and that's creating these attended price increases. And so it's more supply driven. It's been aggravated now, obviously, by COVID and lockdowns in different parts of the world where we are manufacturing goods. It has been further aggravated by the Ukraine-Russian war, and where we have supply shocks. But I have this fundamental view that much of the inflation has been generated by some very large policy shifts in the United States.
And I want to talk about exactly.
Or like only giving out a third of the oil drilling permits that were previously given out for fracking, or for shutting down pipeline projects. Is that the type of policy change you're talking about?
But just before that, we have Jamie Dimon talking about a hurricane, potentially. Are you saying something that significant? What's the chance of recession? And not so much this year, but in 2023 or even 2024?
Well, I think Jamie said one outcome could be a hurricane. It may not be that. So I know that sounds so perfect for the media, a hurricane, but I could see scenarios where it could be quite bad, another downward draft of significance, and that's going to be dependent on earnings going forward. But I could also see a scenario where we're going to be muddling along for the next year or two, right around this level, and maybe up 5%, down 10%, but we're going to be in this range-bound area until we have better information. I mean, the one thing I will say with total certainty, we're going to be living with more uncertainty. I think there's higher probabilities of outcomes that we're going to be more range-bound with a lot of volatility.
Certainly, there's uncertainty about exactly what happens with the Fed. Maybe not so much on rate increases as what are the consequences will be of the quantitative tightening, which actually started this week. What are those consequences likely to be in your judgment?
You better find new buyers. I think the marketplace does not understand the dependency of low rates was on the QE purchases, the trillions of dollars at the Federal Reserve. But let's all be clear, between Japan and China.
Very, very important stuff right here. I try to talk about it all the time, but it's boring as hell. So big thing to listen to right here.
They own, close to $2.5 trillion of U.S. Treasuries too. So there are big owners and big players, and obviously, what will be the future clearing price rates with less QE and now a reversal of it? Do we need to get up to a 3% 10-year to meet a lot more demand? And so much of this we're all going to have to see what are the consequences. If the demand that we saw in intermediate treasuries in May carry on, QE may not be, the reversal of QE is not going to be as big a problem. If we have that fear that inflation is going to be longer and higher, then obviously we're going to have to reset all that, and we're going to probably have higher rates. But I'm of belief that we don't have to have much higher intermediate and long rates.
Inflation. We've been told in the past from Chair Powell now, that he's got the tools he needs to take care of it. Right now, the data don't necessarily indicate that he's taking care of it yet. Do we have the tools?
Well, first of all, I'm a strong believer in Chair Powell and the Federal Reserve
Me, you're a strong believer in yourself since you and the Federal Reserve are one.
doing the right thing. I have great confidence in his abilities to assess the market. So he may know a lot more than I do, so I'm not going to be judging him. I believe the problems of inflation are not Fed-related as much as policy-related. So I believe inflation is really based on some big macro policy changes that are now, that had good intentions, but the unintended consequences are more inflationary. For instance, post-World War II, America's foundation of economic policy was based on consumerism. We built this entire economy post-World War II by the belief that if more Americans can have more things, then we have happy Americans, and we built a whole geopolitical platform around that. And then with the fall of the Soviet Union and we had the peace dividend, we were able to accelerate globalization and building things. And that's one of the fundamental reasons why we had deflationary pressures for the last 30 years, that whole movement towards supply chain navigation and lower prices. I would say 10 years ago, the rise, whether you call it nationalism or the rise of this belief that we have to focus on communities that have been devastated by globalization. We need to find ways of creating better jobs for more Americans. That in itself is inflationary when you move away from the cheapest price ever to another area. And so that's a fundamental change. We changed our immigration policies, and I'm talking about legal immigration, okay? Our legal immigrations, that was changed about 5 years ago, where we reduced the amount of legal immigration. If you look at the rate of increase of immigrants, legal immigrants in the United States from 2000 to 2017, and the rate that we were growing immigration in the last 5 years, we're down 2 million. 2 million new entrants to the United States legally.
I totally agree with that. I think there should be no limit to how many illegal immigrants enter the United States because, let's be honest, a lot of U.S. citizens are lazy as hell, and a lot of immigrants are ready to work their tails off, and I think it only improves our economy if people enter the country legally. Illegally is a little bit chaotic, but there wouldn't be a need for that if we just made an easier system for people to do illegally, which we could just optimize that.
That is very inflationary when we have full employment, when we have these jobs. Think about all the need for workers. What is that going to mean when we start implementing our infrastructure bill, when it's going to take up quite a few new jobs? Where are those employees going to be coming from? It's going to create rising wages. And if you look at earnings, many companies are saying rising wages are a part of their degradation of their margins.
And maybe to add to that, we're also going through an energy transformation globally, and that can't be free.
And I've said in my letters that energy transition can be highly inflationary. And I've always said that an energy transition must be fair and just. And we can't be just mitigating supply. We need to be finding solutions. So we have a strong view on that if we don't find a way to be working with the hydrocarbon companies, with the energy companies, making sure that we have adequate global supply of hydrocarbons at the same time, move technology to create a more decarbonization platform and pathway. And it's not going to be a straight line. It's going to be lumpy like what we're seeing now. So that is also inflationary. And let's be clear, the $7 trillion, I want to underscore, $7 trillion of fiscal stimulus during the COVID years is beyond any stimulus we've ever seen.
If I'm not mistaken, it inflated your balance sheet from about $7 trillion to $10 trillion.
Policy in our history of a country. So you add all those things up, it was a foundation of inflation. And then you overlay the Russian-Ukraine war and the supply shocks, and then you overlay now COVID and the lockdowns and what it's doing for supply chains. All of that is adding on. So getting back to the Federal Reserve and your question, the Federal Reserve does not have tools to fix supply problems. The Federal Reserve's tools, like every other central bank, is to reduce demand through higher interest rates.
See how he says the exact same quotes that Powell says? If you listen closely, you could always tell when people are trying to talk through each other, and you could always tell the BlackRock guys try to communicate to the public for the Fed. But with that said, this is true about the inflation thing. All the supply stuff is out of the Fed's control and much more in the government and the private sector's control.
As I said, I don't think we have a demand problem. We have a supply problem. And so if they believe they have to change demand, that will put us into a recession. I mean, you even heard one of the governors yesterday talk about, we need to raise rates a few more times, and then I can see in a year we're going to lower rates. Okay, and so in my opinion, we need to get to a 2% level, just a level set, and let the data determine where it is. But I do believe, because this is supply generated and policy generated, not as much monetary policy generated, it's hard for them. If they overshoot, we'll definitely get into a recession, and then they're going to have to ease very quickly, and we still may have the supply problems. And in all the conversations I have with business leaders around the world, and I've had a couple meetings in the last 2 days with some significant CEOs of major international companies, and they're all talking about the supply problems, and they're also talking about the need of labor, and they're all seeing the problem, and it's a real big issue.
One of the things that you've been outspoken on, and that's environmental, social, and governance, ESG investing, and it became quite the vogue. At the same time, now it's getting a little bit of tarnish on it. For example, on some of the greenwashing allegations that we saw with the DWS, but also the SEC going at it. What do you make of greenwashing, and what should be done about that as a problem?
A year ago, the taxonomy said gas was brown. Magically now, because the gas is green. And I've always said the energy transition is not brown to green. It's going to be dark brown, the medium brown, the medium light brown, the light brown, and on and on and on. We may develop new technology to leapfrog a couple of those shades, but I can't see that technology yet. But let's be clear, to do this transition. And the problem is, some environmentalists saying, Larry, we don't have time to do that. Right. There lies the debate. Do we have time to go from dark brown to medium brown to light brown? We all debate that. The question is, do politicians have the time to allow that? And there lies the construct that we're living in today.
And what?
Yeah, and the important thing to remember is if we try to rush this too much, millions of people will die. Politicians seem to forget how vital affordable energy is, and we're just seeing a taste of what they want to do right now with these energy prices. So slow and steady. Or we could stop ignoring nuclear energy and get this whole thing moving a lot faster.
You spend a fair amount of time talking to our leadership in Washington, as well as other capitals around the world. Right now, I think it's fair to say the Biden administration has got something, a challenge on its hand when it comes to the economy. It's not getting a lot of credit, whether it should or not. If you were to give them one piece of advice about what to do right now that could make some difference in the short to medium term, what would it be?
Fix immigration, for legal immigration, and I think we all would have said that. If you talk to all the business roundtable, the U.S. Chamber, I mean, we have to be really focused on things like that.
I agree. It's pretty absurd that it's so easy to come here illegally. Yeah, it's extremely difficult to come here legally when these people are unquestionably going to be the most hard workers that reside in the country. So I could see that one. Anyway, hope you enjoyed. Please like, subscribe, and comment if you have any questions. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.